God is subverting all of our systems right now, and it's really painful and it's really scary. But he's doing this because his future for us is hopeful. His future for the world is hopeful. And what we are calling, the worst of times, I have the suspicion that it's like the front end of the Spirit's best of times.
Welcome to the In-Between, a space for anyone navigating from the familiar to the unknown. Whether you're facing a personal, professional, or spiritual disruption, these conversations are here to help guide you through the questions, uncertainties, and opportunities that come with change. Hear from leaders, thinkers, and storytellers who found their way forward, and learn how you can too. No matter where you're starting, you don't have to navigate this alone. Today I'm sitting down with Andy Squyres, songwriter, poet, thinker, and writer. Andy, I have fallen in love with some of your songs. I have a joke with one of my friends that some songs, they get stuck. And what I mean by that is basically I just keep repeating them. Like I won't listen necessarily to another song or to the next song. I will just listen to the same song repeatedly. And several of your songs have been stuck for me. And so I'm excited to have this conversation, and thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah, so, when I listen to your music, there are certain lyrics, even within the songs themselves, that I kind of instantly have resonated with or fallen in love with. And I'm going to read some of them, just for examples. And they're from different songs, but I would let you go, but you won't let go of me. I love that. Either nothing is wasted or everything is. And another one, if you hear your name in vain, it's me looking for you again. Have you always written that way?
Yes, I started. I'm 50 now, 51. I started writing songs when I was 18. And when I first started writing, I wasn't very good, of course, but I do remember, because I have these lines written down, I do remember having the ability to um, be ironic in a way that was creating some kind of tenderness, rather than an irony that was tending towards cynicism. I can do that as well, but I was capable of at least the beginnings of that ability existed early on. And I've actually had this conversation before with people. I've had this question before, and what I attribute that to is my dad. He read to my brother and I every night before we went to sleep. And one of the books that he read to us was Shel Silverstein's poetry book, Where the Sidewalk Ends. And I thought about it many years later, because I was wondering, wow, how did this thing peak, come out of nowhere, seemingly out of nowhere. Of course, it wasn't out of nowhere. But when I ran it back, I took it back to, being 4 and 5 years old and just listening to my dad read through that poetry book, which, for those of you who know it, it's funny, it's clever, it's for kids, but really a lot of the things that he's doing there are, can make anybody smile. So I think that's where I kind of maybe instinctually grabbed a hold of that type of a device, literary device, and then probably eventually saw it later on in other authors and books that I was reading. I internalized it at somewhere along the way.
And I mean, it seems to have resonated with you. I also appreciate, yes, there is a cleverness to it, but it seems to embrace the very real tensions that exist. And I appreciate that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think in some ways a lot of my work is reactionary, and I don't want to be too reductive about that point because I don't think that that's all it is. But because of the orbit that I'm in within the evangelical world, there's a lot of base assumptions that we make in Christian evangelicalism that don't always help us with how to understand life. Though, we may be Christians, but we're still human beings, and life is still happening to us the same way that it is to other people. And we don't get out of the existential questions just because we happen to be Christians. I mean, I'm glad to do all of this with Christ, but I don't think about it in the same way that I used to, where maybe when I was younger, I would think of it, walking with Christ as more of a defense against failure, a life that was ordinary, a life that was maybe poverty stricken, all of these things. And but at some point I realized, a lot of our songs, a lot of our books, a lot of our stories that we tell within this world are very, this is a tired metaphor, but I'll use it anyways, very color by numbers, and eventually I just wanted to make art. I mean, life is absurd, so I feel like our art should mirror that on some level, So it's not an embrace of nihilism. It's not an embrace of despair. It's really, to me, ultimately an embrace of a hope, but it's a hope not attached to sentimentality as much as it is an acknowledgement of like, I've got no other philosophical flex except complete trust in the goodness of Christ, So, yeah, in a nutshell.
Yeah. So are you familiar with Susan Cain?
I'm not.
Okay, so she wrote a book a few years ago. I cannot remember the first book that she wrote, but it kind of put her on the map. It was about introverts and how we as a society have kind of like positioned extroverts, and it was a really interesting read. She has another book that she wrote a couple years ago called Bittersweet. And she talks about melancholy. And she shares this story when she was in college, kind of just blasting from her dorm room this song that was in like some minor key, had this very bittersweet essence to the song. And some of her friends came in and were like, why are you listening to this funeral music?
Yeah.
And for me, I've even shared this with my wife over the years, like there is something very comforting to me in that type of music. There's something in that minor key music. It's like the way she described it, it's like expressing our longing for a more perfect and beautiful world. And your music, to me, seems to embrace melancholy and the bittersweetness of life. Like, what has made you comfortable with that?
I feel like my own stories of grief have freed me from feeling like there was something that I had to live up to, or there was some story of God's that I had to protect. I think at some early stages of my life, it was probably not shared with me overtly, but somehow I subconsciously got this idea that it was up to me or up to us to speak honorably about God and to speak in ways that were convincing. Like we needed to tell his story so well that people would want to believe in him, And I mean, I think if you're even somewhat familiar with the New Testament, there is definitely a case to be made for um, conversations that are persuasive, where you're trying to convince another person of something that you are convicted by. I don't really believe in that postmodern aesthetic of like, all interpretation is just up to the hearer. I don't want to live there. I don't want to live in a world where, each individual just gets to interpret reality on their own. I couldn't do that, first of all. But I will say that, like, I actually feel like it might be more persuasive to tell the truth about something in your life rather than to sweep it under the rug. So to me, it feels like in the Christian world, there's a lot of sweeping under the rug, kind of the gory details of our lives. If we have rated R details in our life, but we because we have a church job, or because we go to church, or because we have all of these communities that are saying that we've got to act and behave and talk a certain way, then we begin to suppress the reality that's really going on in our lives.
Hey friends, I want to pause just for a moment. If you're navigating the complex and emotional process of leaving a mission-driven role, whether that's been ministry, nonprofit work, or any purpose-driven career, you're not just looking for a new job. You're wrestling with things like the personal, professional, and spiritual dynamics that come with all of this. Maybe you're asking things like, who am I outside of this role? What skills do I even have that can translate into the future? Will I ever find work that feels meaningful again? If this is resonating, download Finding Your Way to Flourishing. It's a free guide that I've put together for mission-driven leaders who find themselves in the midst of transition. This isn't just another guide. It's a thoughtfully crafted resource that's designed to help you begin processing your identity beyond the role that you're leaving. It can help you pinpoint which skills you can confidently bring into your new and next role. It'll help you lean into your faith and find peace during the midst of this uncertainty. Not overwhelming, it's not complicated. It's just the first step to getting some clarity and moving forward. You don't have to figure this all out alone, and I'd love to walk this journey with you. This guide is completely free, and you can grab your copy today by clicking the link in the description or in the show notes. Let's start making some sense of this transition together. Okay, now back to the conversation.
I think ultimately that's unhelpful to a human being's growth and thriving. And I think it's unhealthy for a community to live that way too. So the reason why I feel comfortable with using the lyrics that I write is because I really don't care. I don't care if I get uninvited to the party of, contemporary Christian music, or, I have plenty of friends in that world, and I love them, and I understand what they're doing. And I've spent a lot of my time in the past critiquing that world. And I don't know that I want to do that very much anymore, because it's kind of a tired conversation at this point. But if God has called me to do something that feels unique and nobody else understands it, that's okay. I'm not required to make sense to people. I think a lot of artists fall victim to their own pressure, the pressure they put on themselves that they've got to make sense to everybody right away. And that's a trap.
How did you get to that point? I mean, have you always been that way, or was there this moment in your life that kind of helped you walk through that threshold?
Well, I think I'm probably inclined, just personality-wise, to be unafraid of saying things out loud. I mean, my folks divorced when I was really young, but even considering that, I had two really good parents who kind of they made me comfortable in my own skin. You know, I wasn't, you know, I got a lot of confidence from my mom and my dad. But there have been a few moments in my life where there was some kind of, you know, we've lost some friends over the years, and I don't really want to get into all the gory details of that right now, but I'll say this. I've been in a church community where there was one idea of God, and then that idea got challenged by somebody dying in a particular way, and it shakes you. It shakes your community. It shakes you as a person. And what that causes you to do is it causes you to go to your value system, your internal value system, your hierarchy of values. And you're like, wow, we were putting this here, and I don't know that was that important at all. I come from a charismatic background, and, you know, some of your listeners might be familiar with that, but you know, we do a lot of talk around, you know, having the right kind of faith, having faith that can move mountains, you know, the way Jesus did, you know. So, you know, if you believe these scriptures well enough, long enough, you know, you can prevent bad things from happening to you. I mean, I know that'll sound so silly to some of your listeners, but these are real thoughts. These are real ideas, and in certain streams of the body of Christ. And those are all fine and dandy until, you know, the shit hits the fan, and then the theory has proven that it doesn't work, you know. And so, you know, maybe it's just a question of age. Like, maybe you just get to a place in your life where all the things that you believed or were told by really good, well-meaning people when you were young, you're like, oh, this sounds great. Why wouldn't I want to do this? Why wouldn't I want to serve God, make him happy, tell people about him, make music about him? Like, this is fantastic, you know? And then you get a few funerals under your belt, and you're like, I don't know if what we've been pitching all this time is really the thing, you know? I mean, I think in a non-charismatic Pentecostal, strictly just evangelical context, the issue is that every problem can be solved with a soteriological hammer. You know, it's like getting people saved is the only thing we talk about. It's the only thing we think about. It's the only thing we work on. And I just think that we're seeing the disastrous fruit of that mindset right now, with kind of the wholesale deconstruction out of the body of Christ that we're witnessing right now. So, you know, when you assess the landscape and it looks like that, you go, well, I guess it doesn't really matter if I cuss in one of my songs or not, because God doesn't really care that much. You know, I mean, I'm not going to get on Christian radio, but that might be a blessing, not a curse, you know?
So when you're like thinking through these ideas or wrestling through some of these tensions, like inside your mind or in your interior world, what is it like sitting with some of these ideas that haven't yet materialized?
Do you mean just like the seed ideas that I might be having initially?
Yeah, maybe it's the seed idea. The particular thought that is taking you down potentially a road where it's going to result in this piece of art or this piece of writing, but you have this thing inside of you that you're thinking through or feeling, but it hasn't yet materialized. I'm more like, what is that experience like for you? Like,
yeah, well, I spend a lot of time in my head. I'm really annoying to live with, you know. it's funny because I just told this little story on Instagram a couple days ago about I got pulled over in my car, and I wasn't speeding. I was going 2 miles under the speed limit, but the cop didn't like the way his reason was he didn't like the way I changed lanes. And so, I'm there going through all of the motions of getting pulled over. But on the post, I'm telling the story, and my oldest daughter cracks a joke about, she says, "Oh yeah, Dad, I know exactly what was going on in that situation. You were driving along and you were lost in your mind. You were thinking, And so, and she was absolutely true. It's a design feature that feels like a flaw to the people around me, So I think that's probably true of a lot of writers, a lot of pastors, a lot of creative type people who are, we're all trying to solve metaphysical problems, aren't we? This is our work. You're trying to explain the absurdities in your own life so that you can either paint a painting or write a sermon, or all the different things that we do with those thoughts. So I spent a lot of time in my head. I spent a lot of time writing down notes. Hold on one second. I spend a lot of time in my office, in this room right here, in isolation, so that's probably what it's like in a practical sense.
I can relate to that a lot. I mean, I live in my head. How do you begin to bring them to life? Like, what's that process look like?
Well, for me, whether I'm writing a book or I'm writing a song, it's always the words. I'm always looking for the words that have never been heard before. The idea that's never been. I've quoted this. I should remember by now who said it. I think it's Barbara Taylor Brown. I'm butchering that. It's a writer. She said, "I don't trust my writing unless it surprises me." And when I first heard that, I very much resonated with it, because I instinctually am looking for that all the time. Like, what the heck? Like, it's like I have this sensation within my body of a reality that's beyond what I've been able to land in thought yet, but I know it exists because I can taste it on the tip of my spiritual tongue or my intellectual tongue, however you want to say that. It could be an emotional experience, but it's out here, and I know it's going to take a lot of work to go get it. But the process could be grabbing my guitar, finding a melody, and just kind of rough drafting words. And I don't always strike gold, but I do a lot of the time. And with a song, at least the way I look at it, I learned this thing from Leonard Cohen. He talked about how excruciating songwriting was for him, because he felt like every word and every syllable mattered. So he would just be exacting in his lyric writing. And, that was his superpower. People weren't listening to him because he was a great guitar player. I mean, he was a fine guitar player, but, better guitar players are easy to find. If you were listening to Leonard Cohen, you were listening to him because you wanted to hear something you'd never heard before. You wanted to be mystified, And so I feel like I've grown to that place in my life where the art form that I'm pursuing, mainly in songwriting, is I've come to understand who I am as an artist. I'm a fine guitar player, but nobody's hiring me for session work. There's, bands aren't asking me to play with them. That's not who I am. It's not what I am known for. But it's the lyric, it's the melody, and so I might get one line that's gold, but if a song has 24 lines in it total, it could take me a long time to land that song. Depending on what I'm ultimately trying to say with it. Some songs are easy. Some songs are easier than others, but like the one lyric you quoted is from Death Defying Joy, the lyric about, if you hear your name in vain, it's me looking for you again. That song took me a very long time because there's 3 verses in it and there's a massive bridge. And the whole thing from beginning to end is very poignant. If I do say so myself, it's like there's so much happening in that song that each line could be the beginning of its own individual song. But those are the kinds of songs that I like. Those are the kinds of things I want to listen to. I want to listen to something that I don't understand right away. I don't want to be understood right away. I want the listener to, when they're first listening to my music, I want them to feel a little bit of disruption, a little bit of confrontation, because I'm not trying to affirm what people already believe. I'm trying to get them to see that the glory of God himself is much more than what you're thinking about him. And even more than that, it's like my friend Chris Green, he said this years ago, I quote him all the time, but this was so helpful to me. He said, what you believe about God is not God. Your belief system, your belief structure, they are exactly that. They're systems, they are structures. And the system and structure is not inherently bad. I mean, we need structure for everything. We're not trying to live in a world of chaos, but it's a mistake to think that what you currently hold to be true about God himself, that is God himself, is hubris that borders on arrogance. And I feel like many, many Christians are actually locked into this existential crisis where they're so afraid to let go of the certainty of their framework. But if they somehow get to the point where they let that thing go, what they end up experiencing, they have more of a potential to experience the Lord himself. Because I actually believe that. I think in a very practical sense, God himself resists those false idols, those false gods of belief systems. Like if we value those things more than the person of Christ himself, then we've made a mistake. And mistakes are fine. I mean, God's a great person for overcoming those types of mistakes that we all are going to make, right? I don't say any of that to put fear in people. I'm just saying this is kind of the process. At least for me, that's been the process for me, and it's what I want to engage my listener with, like this invitation into a greater understanding of who God might be.
I love that, man. Thank you for going there. I have some other questions about your music before we kind of shift gears.
Yeah.
But I've heard, I think I read somewhere that the National has been influencing your music. I don't know if that's more so recently or always has been a thing, but what is it about their music that is inspiring you?
I think musically, just from a pure music standpoint, they're just such a good band. I mean, but more than that, I think that Matt Berninger's songwriting and his song structures are, well, I would say this. what he represents to me is possibility. What that band represents is possibility. And I think that people like me who have maybe cut their teeth in Christian music, or who had been in kind of that Christian music world, I would say, are so constrained, or too constrained within a template, and to our detriment. It's not that the guys in the National or that band is a chaotic band. Those guys are highly disciplined individuals. If you listen to their music, they're tight, they're focused, and it's very intentional. Mm-hmm. What they're doing is very intentional. But I think that if you look at the thematic material that Matt Berninger is working in, and then the way his lyric writing is, it's askew. It's the truth, but it's the truth slanted. It's, I think one of the things that really wears people out, this isn't just Christian music. You could say this about pop radio. You could say this about country radio, is that when everything that's being said is so on the nose that there's no surprise, there's no, I think we just get tired and we grow numb. Grow numb. Yeah, it's boring. It's boring. And I know that some people, like, that's all they want. That's all they expect. And I think I don't want to live my life just like railing on everybody who only wants to listen to music that is, boring is the wrong way. I don't mean to be dismissive.
Maybe I should say I find it boring.
Yeah, totally. But my point is, it's like the old Big Mac metaphor. Can you get filled on a Big Mac and fries and a Coke? You absolutely can. Would you want to do that every night of your life for an entire year? You wouldn't want to do that. There are other things there are other nutrients that are being needs. And I think that's the same with music and writing and art,
What happens when we're willing to embrace that tension of like both doubt and devotion? How is that shaping your relationship with God?
Well, for me, it's only made me more hopeful, to be honest. I feel more inclined towards faith, not less inclined towards it. I feel more inclined towards the particularities of Christ's work and claims. I feel more grounded. I feel more grounded in the ancient confessions of the church. So to me, I mean, I often say this, that I'm very often misconstrued as being a deconstructionist, somebody who's kind of given themselves to this full-blown effort of deconstructionism. And I would say that's not the case. I would say maybe, if anything, I'm dabbling in reformation. I don't know. That sounds very arrogant to say, but it's maybe it's the work of just challenging the beast that has arisen within the church, and I think, gosh, there are so many podcasts. There's such an effort now to poke holes in the evangelical experiment, which I'm all for. It's like, I get it. Like, we're just witnessing such a meltdown right now of so many pastors just getting well, it's the disclosure. It's like all of our all of our stuff in the body of Christ, at least in this part, is being exposed, and that's very painful, but it's a good thing. But I do feel like in order to do that, you have to be willing to be small, and you have to be willing to be rejected. You have to be willing to be for things to be messy before they're curated to look good. You know, it's kind of like we kind of have to embrace the cringe of all of that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny. I don't particularly think your work is that of deconstructing. You know, as I've become more comfortable with doubt and devotion and holding both of those, I actually find that I seem to feel much closer to God.
Yeah. Yes.
And realizing and understanding that those things are not scary to him. And
that's right.
Why should they be scary to us?
That's right. Yeah.
I mean, he's this big, gigantic God. I'm sure he's okay with us having questions.
Yeah, I had an epiphany. I had an epiphany, I guess about 12, 13 years ago now, where I started having these questions go on. And I think one of my biggest fears was, oh no, I'm on the verge of becoming a heretic, you know? And I do feel like the Holy Spirit said to me at some point, you know, there's nowhere that you can go where my love doesn't exist, where my love is unable to reach you. And you know, I'm not looking to become an apostate, and I'm not looking to encourage people towards that. But for me, it just felt like permission from the Spirit to go exploring in the world of ideas. And I felt very cared for. I felt very cared for by the Lord, because it felt like the things that I was nervous about, he wasn't nervous about, you know. And I will say this, that like, you know, I started reading Peter Rollins and you know, kind of some of the guys that were like, there's these strange versions of Christian atheism that were out there, where like Peter Rollins had this experiment that he would do every year for Lent. He would give up his Christianity, you know, and just really interesting thought experiments like that. And I will say, like, I tiptoed out in those places, but I got pretty uncomfortable pretty quickly with once I started dabbling in kind of like some of the cosmic Christ theology that I was hearing from, you know, some other podcasters out there, where they were kind of subtracting the personality, the personhood, and the transcendence of Christ himself. That's where I kind of stopped. I was like, yeah, those are places I don't want to go. And so, yeah, I mean, it's all one big metaphysical, you know, gamble, isn't it? Like really, I'll tell you, this is my bottom line. This is my baseline for everything, is that I'm really trusting in the goodness of Jesus for everything. Like for all of my friends who don't believe like me, all the people who think differently, believe differently, have different convictions and opinions than me, I'm really, really over my Messiah complex, and I'm letting Jesus be the Messiah as he sees fit. And if somebody wants to talk about these things with me, I am more than willing to talk about those things. But yeah.
If this question is redundant, we can just skip it just based on the things that you said. And along those lines, like I've heard you say something along the lines of like, Christ is hard to follow because we desire pleasure and power, and he is not offering us any of that. So what makes faith worth it to you, particularly maybe in light of everything that you just shared?
Well, it's for me, it's meaning. It's Christ offers us meaning. God offers us meaning. I think the passage is in Hebrews, but the writer of Hebrews is talking about how through the death of Christ, human beings lost their slavery to their fear of death. They stopped being slaves to the fear of death. Mm-hmm. And I find that so fascinating because even the writers of the New Testament are addressing the very basic fears of human beings of that time, So, I've got friends who feel very comfortable in their atheism and who are for some reason they're okay with the prospect of dying someday and just turning into worm food as their ultimate end of everything. Me personally, just being honest, that doesn't sound good to me. I like being alive, and I like existing. I'm glad I'm alive. I'm glad my children are alive. I'm glad my wife is alive. And it's not that I want to deny the reality of death. In fact, I want to embrace the reality of death. But there's something about that eternal hope that is so profound. And but it's not just about the afterlife, right? So that meaning piece to me is what gives the roast beef flavor, and it's what gives the bottle of wine a more inebriating effect, because like pleasure for the sake of pleasure is ultimately it's so sad. I mean, this is my perspective. There are plenty of poets and philosophers who would argue with me on this. I mean, Charles Bukowski, he gave his whole life to the pursuit of pleasure, and he's got volumes written on the virtues of being drunk in the afternoon. And I really do understand that premise. And if I didn't have Christ, that is probably what I would give my life to, is just that libertine Epicureanism, But when I actually have done that, when I've given myself over to that pursuit of pleasure, really, as far as I can tell within myself, there's a very short honeymoon period that comes with that, So what's interesting about the Christian world that we live in is that pleasure and significance have become kind of our two main selling points within evangelicalism to the rest of the world. So what we're saying to people is, wow, is your business failing? Is your marriage failing? Do you not have enough money? Well, we have a God over here who can show you the path to get all of those things. And wisdom is wisdom, man. If you are a wise person and you can apply your wisdom to your life, or you want to go get some wisdom and apply it to your life, and you want to have a better marriage, you want to have better relationships with your kids, you want to have a better business, I think that's fine. I think that you should try to have as good of life as possible, but that is not the gospel. The gospel is something else.
Yeah.
And there's going to be plenty of times, if we're following Jesus faithfully, where he's going to ask us to maybe lay down our wisdom pursuit, our money pursuit, our relational pursuit for something that is closer to looking like his kingdom. You know, it's not like the kingdom of God doesn't include all of these good hopes that we have for our lives and our families. But I know too many people who are either very poor or sick. They're just always sick with something within their body that they can't cure. Who your best life now promises, they don't cut it. They actually, what those best life now promises do is they send those people reeling, spinning out into some kind of, either God's not good, or God doesn't love me, so he's subjecting me to this, or he doesn't even exist. You know, so to me, a more faithful telling of the life that Jesus lived and the reasons why he died have more to do with bringing us into a meaningful life that, you know, by the work of the Spirit, we can be transformed into the likeness of Jesus. And what I interpret that to mean is we will grow in humility. We will grow in being okay with being insignificant. We will grow in contentment, in being content with the things that we have, not always clamoring after other things. Gosh, I forget the initial question, but
I think you answered it. I mean,
okay.
that is, to me, that is way more closely attuned to what the gospel is actually about.
Right. Yeah.
I've also heard you say, like, we're so enamored with, like, these things that God has done in the past, and what that does is it actually causes us to, like, not pay attention to or neglect the possibility of what God may be revealing in ways that we're not, like, paying attention to or expecting.
Yeah.
So I kind of have a two-folded question here.
Yeah.
Do you think there's value in nostalgia? And if so, how do we honor that without getting stuck there?
That is an incredible question. Incredible. As I mentioned, I come from a charismatic background. I go to a charismatic church, and we talk a lot about these past moves of God. Either in our location or in other locations. We're always looking backwards. And I think that is fine. It's fine. I don't think it's bad. So I don't think it's ultimately bad, but what can happen is you can let a past glory keep you from receiving whatever it is that God has given you today. And I think of that story in the Old Testament. It's probably Nehemiah, but Nehemiah has gone back. They're coming out of the exile. They're going back to rebuild the temple, and in the initial phases of Nehemiah and his whatever efforts he's been able to gather to start working, they're slowly working, and there's a lot of resistance. There's a lot of resistance coming from other places, but there's a particular resistance that he's facing. It's coming from the old people who set eyes on Solomon's temple. So it says that this older generation sees the new temple being built, and they're weeping and they're grieving because it doesn't look like the glory of that original temple. Now, what's so interesting about that is that this second temple wasn't going to be as fine. It wasn't going to be as good as Solomon's temple. So they were absolutely right in their assessment that it was a diminished glory. But I feel like that's not even our business. Like, how God wants to appear, how he wants to move, how he wants to show up that's entirely up to him. The only power that we have is to receive, to welcome whatever it is that God happens to be doing on this day. And I think within my own context, we, myself included, we've talked a lot about the way God used to do things, and it can actually become oppressive after a while, because it's like you lose the ability to have a new thought. If it doesn't look like the old thought, it's almost like it can't even enter your head. And this is why I think language is so important. This is why we need the poets, because oftentimes you've got to have these prophetic voices into a situation that are seeing ahead of time, and then they're giving language, and the language might not even be understood and received initially. But those people are essential for bringing forth kind of this new temple, this new glory. And I don't think this is exclusive to charismatic people. I think this dynamic is true of every denomination that was born out of some kind of move of God. We eventually institutionalize, and we eventually get to a place where the system becomes more important to us. The status quo becomes more important to us than God himself. And Gospel of John chapter 3 is probably one I'm going to be wrestling with for the rest of my life. But Jesus on the roof with Nicodemus, and he's saying, man, somebody who's been born of the Spirit, well, they're like the wind. You don't know where they've been, and you don't know where they're going. This is like the indicator of how you know somebody is following Christ. But that's not the criteria we use in the church. And I think that what's true for like an individual is also true for us as a community, as a population, as like an alternative, a culture within a culture, is like, it's almost like God is subverting all of our systems right now. And it's really painful and it's really scary. But he's doing this because his future for us is hopeful. His future for the world is hopeful. And what we are calling, the worst of times, I have the suspicion that it's like the front end of the Spirit's best of times.
So how do we position or posture ourselves to be more receiving or welcoming?
Man, I think we need to train ourselves in things we don't understand. I think we need to subject ourselves to people we don't understand, writers we don't understand, musicians we don't understand. I think we should all spend way more time in art galleries, subjecting ourselves to the work of painters who we may or may not appreciate. I think that we are so, for some reason in our culture, we're so addicted to making sure that everybody knows exactly what's going on all the time. And I think that's a habit that we have to break ourselves from. Mm-hmm. And it's actually, I've got a buddy over in the UK. He and I talk about this, embracing the gospel of the cringe, or embracing the cringe worthy. And I see it actually in a lot of Gen Zers, where the hypercritical postmodernism that was investigating everything with a ultra skeptical interpretive lens, they're realizing that the whole world is tired from that, and we can't do it very much longer. And so if not skepticism, then what? Maybe it's something like awe and wonder. Mm-hmm. Maybe we go ahead and admit to ourselves that we are not going to understand everything. And even though we live in the information age, it's not important that we know about every single thing that's going on around the globe all of the time. Mm-hmm. And maybe we should just go ahead and admit to ourselves that we are creatures with very limited capacity. And when we continually subject ourselves to exceeding that capacity over and over and over, well, we can't be surprised if we start burning out. We may be at that burnout phase, but I think that is that's the gateway into going out in our backyards and just looking at the trees for a while and going, wow, God made these, and just meditating on that for a while. And maybe in our churches, we don't have everything sexy and slick all the time. Maybe we put some spontaneity in the plan occasionally, some planned spontaneity, Yeah, we could talk for a whole nother episode on that.
Yeah, no, I love this, man. I love this. I have a couple more questions. Do you
it's
have
great.
Time?
Absolutely.
So I'm curious, I think this is true. Are you back on a pastoral team or pastoring again?
I have a small role. I have a small role at my church. Yeah, I came on staff about a year and a half ago. It was a cry for help. It was not a cry for help. The church I'm at needed some help, some staffing help.
Okay.
And they asked me to come on, and I agreed to it. It's a very small part-time position. Yeah.
Okay. I was just curious, how you seemingly have kind of been doing your own thing. How did you decide that this was a good idea, particularly in joining a church staff again, or how did you come to terms with that?
Yeah, that's such an interesting question. I think I've had an ongoing vocational search for my entire life. Being a young person, I felt a call, as many young people do. You have that call to something. You don't quite know what it is, but lots of ministry terms are used when you're in that Christian church context. And so I've had a very long and drawn out wrestling match with that calling. It's actually, it's an undeniable thing. If I wanted to rid myself of it now, I don't think I could. If I was to imagine getting rid of it permanently, I think what I would have to do is become an atheist and deny everything that's inside of me. And I don't think I could honestly pull that off at this point. So when I get a tap on my shoulder from people that I love and respect, and they ask me to do something for their sake. I- If it's the right thing, I'll do it, you know? And, but, and this is an interesting way to disclose these things because we're on a public forum here, but of late, what I'm sensing is that I'm probably not called to a pastoral, like a lead pastor role of a local congregation. And the reason is that, and my wife Amy and I, we have this ongoing argument / conversation over this, because the question of what it means to be a pastor, the definition of that comes up. And I'm always thinking like a pastor is somebody who's stable. I don't feel very stable. A pastor is somebody who is good at bringing like, if there's anxiety in the room, they bring strength and comfort, right? I probably don't do that very well. And I've noticed that the things that I want to say out loud often put me at odds with the people that I go to church with. Cause it's not like I'm in a church full of other Andy Squyres. I go to a church filled with regular people, right? And it's wonderful. It's actually exactly what I need, because Lord knows I don't need to listen to somebody else who's got as much bullshit coming out of their mouth as I do, you know? But it's the yin to the yang, right? It's like, I need them and they need me. But the question of like, will I ever be like the head of a church? Man, I don't think that's ever going to be the case. Cause I'm so curious in so many other directions, you know. My music is just like, I'm 51 years old, and this music thing is just, it's strangely really starting to take off, and all of my writing is really starting to take off, and the things that I'm saying publicly seem to be helping a lot of people, helping them make sense of things that they were previously in despair about. So never say never, right? Like, I know I'm probably painting myself and God into a corner, and this is probably the perfect setup to where he taps me on the shoulder and says, okay, now go be a pastor. But that would be funny, but I don't quite feel that.
Yeah. And I appreciate you speaking to that. I was just curious, you know, as someone that had pastored for 18 years, and yeah, I mean, and talking, you know, I talked to a guy last night, he just stopped pastoring, and it's just, it seems to be that a lot of pastors are leaving, and they're definitely asking the question, what do I do with still this pastoral sense? And I think that's just going to look different in a lot of ways than how we've typically defined or contained what pastoring or what it is or what it means. So
Totally.
I appreciate you speaking to that.
Yep.
Last question, Andy. And man, I've so enjoyed this conversation. What does flourishing mean to you nowadays?
Oh man, I think about this all the time. I love this question. I think about this so much because I have 6 adult children who are all either married with kids, on their way to getting married, or they're just launching their lives, right? And we have all of these economic realities that we would all just love to be able to ignore, but none of us can deny. And so how do human beings like live in the information age with supercomputers in the palms of our hands, trying to do marriage well, child rearing well, and pay the mortgage. All of these things are like, wow, I'm watching my kids struggle through this right now. We're struggling through it, but less so because we're older now and we have a little more wisdom. But I think a lot in terms of what's sustainable. What can we sustain for a really long time? So I wish that I had made more money when I was younger. Amy would fight me on that, but I wish I would have given more effort to earning more money when I was younger, for the sake of my kids and for the sake of being able to help my kids start out. So to answer your question, support systems, man, sustainability and support systems. So like, I think some of the most fundamental things that we should be doing is building good marriages, building great relationships with our kids, both young and old, and helping our kids start their lives and being there for them, and then other things as silly or obvious as like planting gardens, getting our hands in the soil, going out in the backyard and sitting in the sun. Like, I don't know, it sounds like some very hippy dippy shit, but it's like we need sunshine. We need to be walking. We need to be talking with our significant others. And we need to kind of like unplug as much as we can from the algorithms and, give ourselves to people in our actual lives rather than these virtual worlds that we're all being sucked into,
I love that, man. Thanks for sharing, Andy.
Yeah.
For those who want to learn more about you, follow your work more closely, where would you want them to go?
Man, andysquyres.com is a great way to start. And then my Instagram is where I'm most, that's where I'm most active. I post all my little essays there first. So yeah, that's the way to do it.
Excellent, man. Well, I value your work.
Thanks, Evan.
Your writings have been meaningful to me, and I appreciate it, man. Thanks for your time today.
Oh, you're so welcome. It's been a pleasure.